स्मरण करो हरि नाम रे, मन में जपन करो हरि नाम रे। स्मरण स्मरण करो हरि नाम रे, हरि ओम भज रे सदा। हरि ओम भज रे सदा। हरि गुण गाओ हरि नाम गाओ, हरि गुण गाओ हरि नाम गाओ। आनंद आनंद हरि नाम रे, आनंद आनंद हरि नाम रे। गुण गाओ हरि नाम गाओ, हरि गुण गाओ हरि नाम गाओ। जपन करो हरि नाम रे, स्मरण स्मरण करो नाम रे, मन में जपन करो हरि नाम रे। स्मरण स्मरण करो हरि नाम रे, हरि ओम भज रे सदा। हरि ओम भज रे सदा। हरि गुण गाओ हरि नाम गाओ, हरि गुण गाओ हरि नाम गाओ। आनंद आनंद हरि नाम रे, हरि नाम रे। हरि गुण गाओ हरि नाम गाओ, हरि गुण गाओ हरि नाम गाओ। गौरी नंदन गज वदना, गणेश वरदा मां पाहि, गणेश वरदा मां पाहि। गजमुख गजमुख गणनाथा, गजमुख गणनाथा। गणेश वरदा मां पाहि, गणेश वरदा मां पाहि। गजानना 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 ओम गजवदना, गजानना ओम गजवदना। गौरीनंदन गजवदना, गौरीनंदन गजवदना। गणेश वरदा पाहि, गणेश वरदा पाहि। गजमुख गणनाथा, गजमुख गणनाथा। गणेश वरदा मां पाहि, गणेश वरदा मां पाहि। गजानना 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 ओम गजवदना, गजानना ओम गजवदना। एकदन्ता गजानना, एकदन्ता गजानना। हे रंभा गजानना, हे रंभा गजानना। एकदन्ता गजानना, एकदन्ता गजानना। हे रम्भा गजानना हे रम्भा गजानना 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 ओम गजवदना गजानना ओम गजवदना एकदन्ता गजानना एकदन्ता गजानना हे रम्भा गजानना हे रम्भा गजानना एकदन्ता गजानना एकदन्ता गजानना हे रम्भा गजानना हे रम्भा गजानना 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 ओम गजवदना गजानना ओम गजवदना गौरीनंदन गजवदना गौरीनंदन गजवदना गणेश वरदा मां पाहि गणेश वरदा मां पाहि गजमुख गणनाथ गजमुख गजमुख गणनाथ गणेश वरदा मां पाहि गणेश वरदा मां पाहि गजानना 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 ओम गजवदना गजानना ओम गजवदना गौरीनंदन गजवदना गौरीनंदन गजवदना गौरीनंदन गजवदना. Sorry. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Together we will chant chapter 4, verses 1 to 10. Bhagavad Gita, chapter 4, verses 1 to 10, chanting. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Imam Vivashvate Yogam Roktavanaham Avyayam Vivashvan Manave Praha Manurikshvaka Vebravit Yevam Parampara Praptam Imam Rajarshayo Viduhu Sakale Neha Mahata Yogo Nashtah Parantapa Saye Vayam Maya Tedhya Yoga Proktah Puratanaha Bhakto Sime Sakha Cheti Rahasyam Hetaduttamam अर्जुन उवाच अपरं भवतो जन्म परं जन्म विवस्वतः कथमेतद्विजानीयाम् त्वमादौ प्रोक्तवानिति। श्रीभगवानुवाच बहूनि मे व्यतीतानि जन्मानि तव चार्जुन तान्यहं वेद सर्वाणि न त्वं वेत्थः परन्तप। अजोऽपि सन्नव्ययात्मा भूतानामीश्वरोऽपि सन् प्रकृतिं स्वामधिष्ठाय सम्भवाम्यात्ममायया। यदा यदा हि धर्मस्य ग्लानिर्भवति भारत अभ्युत्थानमधर्मस्य तदात्मानं सृजाम्यहम्। परित्राणाय साधूनां विनाशाय च दुष्कृतां धर्म संस्थापनार्थाय संभवामि युगे युगे। जन्म कर्म च मे दिव्यम् वेगं यो वेत्ति तत्त्वतः त्यक्त्वा देहं पुनर्जन्म नैति मामेति सोऽर्जुन। वीतरागभयक्रोधाः मन्मया मामुपाश्रिताः बहवो ज्ञानतपसा भूता मद्भावमागताः। Sorry. So we have been studying the topic self, the eternal teacher. So in this we have covered the mantra 7 in the previous class, wherein the message is that, O Bharata, yada yada hi dharmasya glanirбhavati bharata abhyutthanamdharmasya tadatmanam srujamyaham. O Bharata, whenever there is a indeed decline of dharma, righteousness, and a rise in adharma, unrighteousness, then I manifest myself. This is what we studied thoroughly in the previous class. We will have a quick recap so that we will understand the thought flow from this verse onwards. So, the Krishna addresses Arjuna by the name Bharata. Bharata means Bha Si Rataha, means reveling in light. Reveling means enjoying, ruminating, anchoring, fixing, contemplating on the all the time, bathing in the light of consciousness. Consciousness is the supreme self, the Atman. All the time you are living and moving in the self. Such a person is called Bharatvasi. So India has been always been reputed as a spiritual country because of the inclination of this part of the land. People are dedicated to the self-realization or God realization, nothing short of it. This is the purpose and mission of every human being lived in this planet once upon a time. So the spiritual country where people reveled in divine light all the time, their focus of attention is on the God on the Supreme Self rather than the mundane existence of this worldly life of all the time acquisition and enjoyment. So, Krishna apparently draws the Arjuna's attention to his role in maintaining the spiritual status of Bharat, the India. The very mission in life is to maintain that spiritual parameter. So Arjuna was drawn to Krishna's advice. India has been blessed with periodic visitations continuously from time immemorial. There is a periodic visitations of great sages and saints in different periods of time. From time immemorial, they keep visiting the land of India and to revive this divine consciousness among the human beings, among the people. They appeared in the country whenever there is a dharma, whenever there is dharma, righteousness is declined, is reduced, and adharma, unrighteousness, unrighteousness increase, then this periodic visitations of the sages and saints appear in the scene and try to resurrect the righteousness and bring back the unrighteousness. So, to indicate this, Lord Krishna declares that in first person singular pronoun I manifest. I means the pure consciousness, the God consciousness, the common consciousness in every human being refers to the I. That I has been appeared as myself. I manifest myself. He means that the self-realized souls, the enlightened masters, sages, appeared in the world to bring out, to resurrect, to put back into the track from righteousness to the righteousness wherever there is a reduction in righteousness. So, if you carefully analyze, the world is made up of is a admixture of good and bad, right and wrong. It is a good and evil is a mixture of the world. World is made up of the pairs of opposites. One of the definitions of world is dvandvas. Dvandva. World is made up of dvandvas, means pairs of opposites. Therefore, good cannot exist alone without evil, and evil cannot exist alone without the good. That is the very integral part of this world. So, dharma means the righteousness, godliness, divinity, morality, virtue, whereas adharma means unrighteousness, which is blasphemy, unrighteousness, immorality, and valuelessness. So, vice, the virtue is the righteousness, vice is the unrighteousness. So, dharma cannot maintain itself for a long period of time because it is a natural consequence for long without the inspiration and guidance of self-realized sages and saints. Until and unless there is a self-realized master, dharma cannot sustain itself. So dharma cannot maintain itself for long without the inspiration and guidance by the enlightened masters. Whereas the sense objects of the world, the perceptions, emotions, and thoughts, the sense objects of the world drag the mankind down to the main materialism. They draw towards materialism and sensualism. It is a natural law. So people tend to indulge in the material world and lose their divine status, lose themselves in the senses and sensual indulgences. They rarely entertain the thoughts of divinity, and they rarely entertain the higher values of life. Consequently, they fail to understand the higher knowledge. They fall into materiality, sensuality, immorality, and barbarity. This is the natural consequence of dropping down to the unrighteousness because of attractions and aversions. Attractions towards sensuality and materiality leads to immorality and barbarity. This decline continues for generations until people grow weary and teary. They wear and tear, they're weary, they get fed up, and their material and sensual lives, they get caught up and they get neutralized. So as it were, they don't want to continue anymore this sensual and materialistic life because of their weary for generations, the decline. They become desperate to look for the alternative. They look for the solution to their unrighteous living, their suffering, will search for some positive life, righteous life. At that time, they become desperate to look for alternative to their unrighteous living. This creates a conducive environment which draws the enlightened souls towards them. In course of time, in the course of time, people people re-establish. In the course of time, people re-establish righteousness in the country. But the nature of the senses and sensual indulgences is such a way that again they fall a victim, easy prey to the pressures of sense objects, and a decline of the righteousness sets again. Unrighteousness prevails once more. This cycle of righteousness becoming unrighteousness and unrighteousness creates the conducive environment to draw the attention of righteousness. This cycle repeats itself over and over again. This is the nature of the world. Krishna here merely states that the law of nature, this law of nature, so that humanity may make use of every opportunity. Being born as a human being, he can utilize the opportunity to evolve from adharma to dharma by using this world of pairs of opposites and develop the righteousness in him, and perhaps reach the great state of enlightenment and become godhood, the ultimate identity of individual, the original nature of Atman. Through this understanding and gaining the higher values of life, this is what the meaning and message of what we so far covered in the verse 7. O Bharata. O Bharata means, oh, what a great culture and tradition of a human being born in India, who is all the time bathing in divine light of consciousness, reveling in consciousness. Yoga ratova, bhoga ratova, sangha ratova, sangha vihinaha. Yasya brahmani ramate chittam nandati nandati nandatyava. Whether you are in yogic practice of spirituality, or whether you're in bhoga, in worldly acquisition and enjoyment, sensuality. Where is your mind? If your mind is constantly fixed to the Almighty of the consciousness, you always be happy, happy, ever be happy, says the Adi Shankaracharya. So use this world to transcend the world. Use this unrighteousness elements by developing higher values, by gaining the knowledge from enlightened masters, and then transcend these pairs of opposites and reach the ultimate state of enlightenment is the advice given by Lord Krishna. Is because the human birth is a great opportunity only to evolve towards the immortality. The highest state of enlightenment is the rarest possibility for a human being alone. So using this adharma in the world and develop to dharma and reach the ultimate state of enlightenment is the message. So whenever there is a decline of this righteousness and whenever there is a rise of unrighteousness, I manifest myself, means the supreme consciousness, the God consciousness in the form of enlightened sages and saints. They visit the scene, they manifest themselves in the scene and develop this righteousness in the country. And to grow spiritually, they have a conducive environment. This is the fight time and again going on in the periods of history. Therefore, Krishna uses this mantra for advising Arjuna to develop that righteousness and gain the knowledge of the self, therefore, so that you can reach the ultimate state of enlightenment. Now we get on to the mantra 8. Paritranaya sadhunam विनाशाय च दुष्कृतां धर्म संस्थापनार्थाय संभवामि युगे युगे. परित्राणाय साधूनां विनाशाय च दुष्कृतां धर्म संस्थापनार्थाय Sambhavami yuge yuge. So how he manifests and what he does after manifesting in the world when there is a unrighteousness took over the country and righteousness is declined, he gives this mantra, how he executes his actions. 8th translation. For the protection of the virtuous, paritranaya sadhunam. Sadhus means virtuous people, good people, divine people, godly people. Such people, protection, for the protection of the virtuous, and vinashaya chadushkrutam, for the destruction of the wicked people, cruel people, selfish people, the people who creates barbarity, immorality, atrocities, all the things, he destroys them. So for the protection of the virtuous and for the destruction of the wicked people and for the establishment of dharma, righteousness, I am born from age to age, says Lord Krishna. So Lord Krishna again continues that I am born again and again means the periodic visitations of enlightened masters visit this place to resurrect the righteousness in the form of consciousness, God consciousness. The enlightenment people of high caliber, they appear into the scene and resurrect this debacle, their declined state. That's what Krishna continues in the strain of righteousness prevailing over unrighteousness. Wherever adharma is there, dharma will be re-established by manifesting the divine consciousness. Enlightened souls appear whenever there is a righteousness declines and unrighteousness took over the world. In the world, takes over the world. This is the law. Their efforts are directed in 3 distinct ways. Whose efforts? The enlightened masters, the great sages and saints who appear, they have these 3 duties. The responsibility, the obligatory duties they discharge in the world. First duty is protection of the virtuous. We always save the sadhus, protection of the virtuous. And second duty is the destruction of the wicked people, the cruel people. Such people they destroy. And third one is the establishment of dharma, righteousness in the country they establish, and they leave the scene. This is the three duties they perform. Their efforts are directed in these three distinct ways. So what is the three distinct ways is that when the righteousness declines and unrighteousness took over, prevails in the country among the humanity, the great masters protect the virtuous people. The great enlightened sages protect the good people, virtuous people, and destroy the wicked people. So, the destruction of the wicked and protection of the virtuous is the condition, set stage, establishes a stage for the establishment of righteousness, dharma, the godliness. The divine qualities are established only when you destroy the wicked people and protect the virtuous people. That is the stage for establishing the higher values, the godly qualities, the divine qualities in the country. PT leads such establishment of dharma, helps to enable the people to lead union with the supreme self, union with the ultimate state of enlightenment they were able to launch onto. So this verse captures the very theme of the scriptures, the very purpose of the scriptures, the very purpose of the Shastras. So, what is the theme? The theme is to reach the enlightenment, to reach the immortality, to reach the birthless, deathless state of enlightenment, realization, God realization. So, this verse captures the very theme. Lord Rama, if you carefully analyze, the Lord Rama in Ramayana, he protected Sugriva, protected the Sugriva, the brother of the Vali, the wicked person, Sugriva, the virtuous person, the good person. He protected the Sugriva and destroyed Vali, who is the brother. That episode set stage was then set for the reunion with Sita, which is Rama joining Sita. Reunion, the individual, Sita represents the individual, Rama represents the divine consciousness. So union with Rama, with Sita is individual merging with the ultimate state of enlightenment. This is the stage set because of the protection of Sugriva, which is the Vali's brother and the good person. As you all know, the story of the Vali and Sugriva. The Vali is the wicked person. He usurped the kingdom of Sugriva and took over his family, wife, everything, and he created a suffering to Sugriva. Sugriva is the good person. He was hiding in the Rishyamukha mountain, wherein he waited for the Rama to come, and the both brothers, the Sugriva and Vali, were the brothers, own brothers, but the Vali was very vicious and very selfish and very greedy. So, who represents is full of immorality and barbarity. In fact, the great Ravana was scared of Vali because of Vali has such a great power he commanded. So, any adversary, any opponent who stands in front of Vali, half of his opponent's power will come to Vali. Therefore, anybody in any battle, Vali always wins because his own power plus the half of the power of the other person will put him on a high pedestal. Therefore, the other person can never succeed. Vali always wins. Therefore, what happened? The Rama, with his brilliant intellect, he uses his intellect, and he hid behind the tree and shot Vali and killed him. And he protected Sugriva and made him the king, and that's how he set the stage of reunion with the Sita. This is the episode what was the happened in the story, which will is the symbolic representation of you first destroy within you the bad elements, the selfish elements, the negative elements, the desires and ego and selfishness, and protect the goodness, the divine qualities, cultivate positive emotions, cultivate positive thoughts, cultivate positive, selfless, unselfish actions. Thereby, you set a stage wherein you have a divine qualities. From the establishment of divine qualities, you will be able to pursue the higher and higher until you reach the ultimate state of enlightenment, is the message behind this mantra, this verse. So Lord Krishna is protected the Pandavas, and Lord Krishna protected the Pandavas. Even in Mahabharata, the Pandavas are the good people, virtuous people. Kauravas are the bad people, vicious people, unrighteous people. So Lord Krishna protected Pandavas and destroyed the Kauravas, and thereby adharma, unrighteousness, gave way to the righteousness, establishment of dharma, and self-realized souls have appeared in the world in different periods of history, thus, and for the purpose of re-establishment of dharma. So the beautiful verse is talking about this establishment of human qualities of divine nature, and then slowly getting the human being towards the union with the supreme self is the mantras, this verse, gist of this verse. So paritranaya sadhunam vinashaya chadushkrutam, it's a famous verse. Dharma samsthapanardhaya sambhavami yuge yuge. Time and again, the periodic visitations of enlightened masters do this job so that the world is protected, the world is maintained, the dharma is resurrected, and adharma is destroyed. This is the stage set, and ultimately guide the human beings towards the union with the Supreme Self, is the message in the mantra verse. Now we get on to the verse number 9. Sorry. जन्म कर्म च मे दिव्यम् एवं यो वेत्ति तत्त्वतः त्यक्त्वा देहं पुनर्जन्म नैति मामेति सोऽर्जुन. जन्म कर्म च मे दिव्यम् एवं यो वेत्ति तत्त्वतः त्यक्त्वा देहं पुनर्जन्म नैति मामेति सोऽर्जुन. The verse translation: he who janma karma, he who knows thus my divine birth. Janma means birth, karma means action. He who, whoever may be, yaha means he who, janma karma, the divine birth of me, means Lord Krishna's birth as it were. He who knows thus my divine birth and action, the activities, because Lord Krishna's actions are always divine actions, selfless actions, actions dedicated to the only Supreme Self. That means it is the completely liquidation of the ego and egocentric desires. We function on only obligatory duties. So, he who knows thus my divine birth and action in true light, in proper light, having abandoned the body. The body means the vasanas, the karmas, the actions, destroyed. He is not born again. He comes to me means the self, the realization, birthless, deathless, immortality. It's very interesting. He who knows, thus my divine birth and action means a person really understands the Lord Krishna's life and his actions, his modus operandum in day-to-day living. In the true light means in the essence, in the proper understanding. Having abandoned the body, means the vasanas, the destruction of vasanas. He is not born again. He will not be born again, means he will not be taking birth, this punarapi jananam, punarapi maranam, punarapi janani, jatare shayanam, ihasamsare, bahudustare, krupayapare, pahimurare. Repeatedly lying in the mother's womb by getting into birth and living and dying and birth and death and birth and death. This is what common every human being is caught up in this infinite cycle, and nobody is aware that there is simply mad rush going on. Here is the great message given by Lord Krishna, giving the technique of get out of this bondage, suffering, this vasana, this birth and death cycle, and be free and immortal, liberated. This is what the technique is talking about. So Krishna uses the first person singular pronoun me. Me means the consciousness. Any enlightened master, any divine person, any self-realized, God-realized person, when he says me means the supreme self, the Atman. They don't have limited identity, this individuality, because they merged with the supreme God and become infinite consciousness, God consciousness, speaking as it were. So Krishna is identified with the Atman, become Atman, and speaking Atman, speaking as it were. Krishna uses the first person singular pronoun me to mean Atman, the supreme self within. The self, the Atman, in any human being, it doesn't act. The body performs actions, the mind feels emotions, the intellect conceives thoughts and ideas. So the body only perceives and actions, but the Atman within, it doesn't act. It does not act. Though ever inactive, Atman is an inactive principle. Though it is ever inactive, it is nevertheless the primeval source. It is the prime source of all activity. It is the very responsible factor which enables any action happens. So without Atman, action cannot emerge. Your body cannot perceive. Your mind cannot feel without the Atman. Any emotion it is feeling. Your intellect cannot conceive. Any thoughts or ideas cannot think without the Atman enabling the intellect to think. So Atman is the source, the power source, primeval source of all actions. But Atman doesn't act. Atman has no actions. Without the self, no one can act. Just as it is the electricity which enables the bulb to glow, give light, and it is the electricity in the fan which enables the fan to rotate and give air. It is the electricity in the fridge which enables the fridge to cool. It is the electricity in the heater to heat. So, but electricity is not hot, electricity is not cold, electricity is inactive principle. It just gives power. Electricity cannot rotate, electricity has no light. It is the source which produces the light in the bulb. Similarly, friends, you are producing infinite varieties of actions, but Atman within you doesn't act. But without the Atman, No action can emerge out of your personality of the body, mind, intellect. It is the Atman which enables the body to perceive and act. It is the very Atman which enables the mind to feel various emotions. It doesn't matter what you perceive, it doesn't matter what you feel, it doesn't matter what you think through the intellect. It is the Atman which enables the intellect to conceive various thoughts and ideas. So, without the self, no one can act. The self is like electricity in the heater or cooler. The same example he also gives, the electricity has neither heat nor cold. So, it is the inactive principle. It is the primeval source in all electrical gadgets. So, it is inactive, is thus the primal cause of all action. He who realizes, the moment you understand that Atman is neutral, it has no propelling to any action, it just only provides the platform, the power source, the primeval source, but it doesn't act. The moment anyone understands this inactive principles nature of the Atman, who realizes this relationship of the self with all actions, abandons. Such a person abandons the body, he just disconnects the matter, abandons the body and become one with the supreme self, become the Atman, realizes the self. Thereafter, he does not act, he does not go through the process of birth and death because he becomes Atman. Atman is neutral, no desires, desireless state he experiences. Such a person never born again because the birth, death happens only because of vasanas, because of desires. The more number of desires you have, more births and deaths you go through. So, such a person who understands the role of the Atman in the human being and the actions which are executed by the body, mind, intellect, and the role of Atman for the body, mind, intellect clearly distinguished and understands clearly the Atman doesn't act. It is the body, mind, intellect which they act in the respective field of perceptions and emotions and thoughts. The moment you understand and realize the relationship between the Atman and the body, mind, intellect, such a person who understands discards the body and its functions, associates with the Atman, identifies with the Atman, become one with the Atman and merges with Atman and reaches the state of immortality. Such a person who merged with the Atman, identified and become Atman, he will never go through the process of birth and death again, is the message given. So then why today the human being is suffering? Today human being is suffering because of ignorance of the role of the Atman within you. Nobody knows the Atman today. The ignorance of self creates this suffering and sorrow in the world. So human being suffers from ignorance of the supreme self, the Atman within. And as a result of the ignorance of the self, the uncontrollable vasanas, desires, the human being is full of desires, replete with vasanas and desires. Human being is full of, and he remains attached to body and its perceptions and mind and its emotions, intellect and its demands. So he tries to, a individual, a human being is trying to meet the demands, fulfill the desires through the body of the body by contacting sense objects of the world, external world, and to fill the desires, to satisfy those desires. And as you all know, any amount of contacting the world through desires, desired objects, the satisfaction is not possible because the desires are never ending and there is no satiation or fulfillment through any amount of objects which you contact through indulgence in the desires. Because the more number of desires, the more you contact the world with the desires, the desire keeps increasing. So you become various modifications of desire. The one desire for money, for example, the desire for wealth. You contact the world and trying to accumulate wealth, and you keep running after the world, and you become greedy and avaricious and get more and more and never satisfied. No human being is satisfied with anything in the worldly acquisition. So therefore, the desire keeps increasing, the demands keeps increasing by contacting the external world. He moves from one experience to another experience, constantly changing this world in the pursuit of his desires. So there is no satisfaction or fulfillment. In philosophical parlance, in philosophical language, he is dead at first experience and born at the second experience. So this birth and death is repeatedly is explained by one experience to another experience. One experience is over and you are dead, and another experience is born, that is the birth. So philosophically, he is dead at first experience and born in second experience. Thus, his entire life, everybody's entire life is a continuous chain of births and deaths and births and deaths. So experience to experience, you are moving. So flow of experiences continuously because of constant change in chasing of these desires and desired objects. So, and experiences. Therefore, thus his entire life consists of continuous chain of births and deaths and births and deaths of multifold experiences, infinite number of experiences. At the end of all the event, there is no satisfaction or fulfillment. You are where you are with misery and suffering. So, moreover, when his physical body becomes inadequate, when the body becomes inadequate to fulfill the desires, the body becomes old, the body becomes diseased. When the body becomes inadequate to fulfill the desires of the mind, he discards the body and takes another new body to fulfill those desires. There occurs the death of the first body and the birth of the another body. That means you are born again. This cycle of physical births and deaths continues endlessly until your desires are not exhausted. When the desires are exhausted, then only you stop these births and deaths and births and deaths. This experience is changing. You become changeless. As long as he remains ignorance. So the cycle of births and deaths continues endlessly as long as one remains in ignorance of himself and the result of desires. So he constantly, as long as a human being entertains desires and fulfilling those desires, running after the desires, these births and deaths happen and they endlessly follow you. The moment you remove this ignorance of the Supreme Self by gaining the knowledge of the Self, by realization of your Supreme God, the Atman within you, you are that Atman, not the body, not the mind, not the intellect. The moment a person establishes in this firm understanding of the neutral nature of the Atman, the identity of the Atman, such a person removes the ignorance of the self and reaches the fourth plane of consciousness, which is God consciousness. Until then, the ignorance lingers, ignorance of your own Supreme Self, and you constantly entertain the desires. So, this cycle of physical births and deaths continues endlessly as long as he remains in ignorance of his own supreme self and entertain desires. This is the state. Therefore, the self within, the supreme God, the Atman, the self within is paripurna. Purnam means whole, complete, all full. Paripurna means supremely full, supremely whole, supremely complete. You are the self, the Atman, the peace and bliss of infinite stature. That is your original state. That is your true being. That is your real nature. Whole, perfect, and absolute, infinite state you are. That is your original state. The Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita proclaim, pronounce vehemently, emphatically, that is, you are that supreme self, and pronounce vehemently to all mankind. This has been declared by the great Mahavakyas. Tat Tvamasi. You are that God, the supreme self. Aham Brahmasmi. I am Brahman. You are Brahman. The pure consciousness within you is Brahman, the supreme self. You are that supreme self is declared in the Upanishads. That the what? You are that God, supreme self. You are the self, the supreme self, the Atman within. You are God. But you do not realize at this moment, you think you are limited, restricted individual. You do not realize the essence of this truth. Nobody realizes. They always believe that you are the individual of this particular Nyama Rupa, name and form. You are ignorant of your own supreme nature, your own original nature you have lost. Consequently, you feel a sense of imperfection, a sense of unfulfillment, a sense of in a void, a imperfection. You feel a sense of void within, a void, an emptiness, a lacuna, which is the sense of imperfection, incompleteness, and unfulfillment felt within. This void, this lacuna, this feeling of unfulfillment, imperfection, incompleteness generates thoughts. This generates thoughts. These thoughts run towards the external world of objects and beings. These thoughts rush to the world. Those thought currents which are trying to fulfill this void, this emptiness, by contacting the world of objects and beings in the fond hope of filling this void. And these thought currents are called, emanating from you towards the world, is from the ignorance of the self within. Ignorance of the self are called desires. So desires are nothing but indiscriminate thoughts springing from the void within, the emptiness felt within, the unfulfillment, the lacuna, the incompleteness, which generates thoughts. These thought currents which rush towards the world are called desires. These desires force you to undergo the chain of birth and death and birth and death until you get back to that void. And the very source of the void is ignorance of yourself, and that is lost. You only know the desires and running after the world, and you caught up in the birth and death life cycle. But the wise person, the knowledgeable person who surrender to the scripture, gain the knowledge from the master, from the enlightened master, such person gains this knowledge, recognize the play of the self, recognize the role of the Atman within, the knowledge of the Atman, the self knowledge. Consequently, he and the actions, how they are emerging from the body, mind, intellect, he clearly distinguishes. Such a wise person realizes the essential nature of the self. So the self is the Atman, which is all full, whole, complete, Paripurna. So the essential nature, once you realize, once you recognize, once you understand, you stop cultivating more desires and you withdraw from the world, from the desire, from entertaining thoughts and desires, because you are already full, you are already whole, you are already complete, you are the Tattvamasi, you are that. The moment you recognize that, you automatically stop entertaining desires. You entertain no more desires because you understood your essential nature is the self. The nature of the self is the Paripurna, whole, absolute, complete, all full. That is Purnamada, Purnamidam, Purnat, Purnamudachyate, Purnasya, Purnamadaya, Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. This is Purnam, this is infinite. That Supreme Self, the Atman, is infinite. Infinite came out of the infinite, and what left after coming out of the infinite is infinite. So, this is the ignorance of the self playing everywhere. The moment you are wise enough to recognize the role of the self and its neutral and primeval source of all actions, and the actions emerged by the vasanas, which are the desires, which use the body, mind, intellect for perceptions and actions, emotions and thoughts, you realize there is no more desires needed because you are the self. You find no use for this body anymore. And in effect, you abandon the body, you give up this body and embark and fix yourself in the self, merges with the self and becomes the supreme being. You reach the immortality, the God consciousness. You are no longer subjected to birth and death anymore. That is the state you got to reach as a human being, is the dignity and prestige of every human being. In his lifetime, he must recognize who is he and reach that state of enlightenment is the very purpose of what Lord Krishna advising Arjuna, and reach the self. That is the mantra, verse 9. We will continue with verse 10 in the next class. Thank you very much. Hari Om.